everybody, Keep7 here, back with another Magic the Gathering Arena video, and today I'm introducing a new video format called Meta Mondays. And I know it's Wednesday today, but I'm gonna try to shoot to record these and release these on Mondays, just for the alliteration and because I'm pathetic. But essentially, what Meta Mondays is it's going to be a check-in on the meta in pretty much all the relevant formats that I play, which is best of one and best of three in both standard and historic. So we're just going to go over kind of the top 5 decks, the decks I'm seeing on ladder. I'm also going to be using my trusty MTGA Assistant application, which if you haven't downloaded it already, I highly recommend you do. You can get all the information that I'm about to provide for you on that application. I'm going to take it a little step further. I'm going to obviously tell you what the application tells me as far as the decks that are being played. I'll tell you any decks that maybe I'm seeing played frequently, but I'll take it a step further and I'll try to give you some advice so that you can try to fight the meta. The top 5 decks that we see pop up for each one of these formats. I'll talk about maybe what deck you can play to try to beat the decks that are popular, and maybe cards to include, stuff like that. So it's a pretty basic video format, but hopefully I'll give you some information to hopefully help you get some wins to help you climb the ladder. We'll start with standard, and again, we're going to do best of one and best of three, so try to pay attention, obviously, to the recommendations that I make for best of one and best of three, as obviously they're going to be pretty different for each format. So for standard, in best of one, we have the top 5 decks of Mono Red Aggro, Mono White Life Gain, Dimir Rogues or Dimir Rogues Mill, Gruul Aggro, and Esper Yorion. Mono White Life Gain and Mono White, it's like Mono White Aggro, Mono White Life Gain Aggro. It's a pretty recent deck to kind of pop up in the best of one format. I think it's getting some popularity in best of three. Covert Go Blue and Croakies were both playing Mono White decks to some success a couple weeks ago, and I think people started catching on and have realized it's actually a very viable deck, especially in a best of one format and kind of in a best of three format as well. There are lists out there. I'll put a link in the description, or maybe I'll post a picture on the screen for you to see. There are lists out there for best of three and stuff like that, so you can absolutely see but it is a deck that is kind of exploding in popularity recently. But based on that list, the best advice that I can give you in best of one, it's difficult. Best of one is a lot of the times, especially, if you look at that list, Mono Red, that's aggro. Mono White Life Gain is aggro. Dimir Rogues can be aggro. It's aggro control, but, it can be an aggro deck. Gruul aggro, and Esper Yorion is the only deck there that's not aggro. You can fight this by playing mid-range if you have a mid-range deck, but a lot of these decks, like Gruul aggro, it kind of can feel like a mid-range deck because sometimes they're not really doing much with their first few turns. They're generating a lot of value with their Innkeeper, drawing cards to deploy a Questing Beast and then an Embercleave, and then it kind of feels like a mid-range deck. They're just deploying these big threats that need answers, and usually you don't have it. So you can play mid-range, but you really have to have a powerful mid-range deck if you want to beat these. If you play mid-range, you're probably beating Mono Red Aggro and maybe Mono White Life Gain, but even Mono White Life Gain can really just be, it's a deck that can get really big, like if they have the Heliod and they have the Linden and they have the triggers and Daxos, if they're playing that, or, they're kind of building their board up, they can really get it big. If they're playing with, like, Seasoned Hollowblade, it can just be really hard to remove, so probably, like, mid-range might not even be the best recommendation. And what I would say, the best recommendation that I can give you to kind of combat these 5 decks right now would be play Gruul Aggro and main deck Soulseer. Soulseer is probably your best bet against Mono White Life Gain. If you're going to be seeing a lot of Mono White Life Gain, Soulseer absolutely hoses Mono White Life Gain. It'll get rid of the Indestructible on Heliod. It plays around, Selfless Savior. Doesn't really play around All Seed of Life's Bounty because, All Seed of Life's Bounty is protection, but at the very least, it gives you an option. In a lot of situations, you're going to be stuck not being able to play around a Selfless Savior, All Seed of Life's Bounty, Heliod. it's just one more option. So my best advice, play Gruul Aggro, main deck, Soulseer. Hopefully that'll get you some wins. Best of one is just a hard format to give advice for because it's just, it's one game. You have one game and one option, so you don't even have a sideboard available to you, so it is tough. But the only way that you're going to beat all these aggro decks, especially like Mono Red Aggro, you beat them by going bigger. So Gruul Aggro goes bigger. and can be faster. And it's the same idea. It'll generally be a race, but if you have the right removal and stuff like that, I think you can beat them. Mono white life gain, main decking Soulseer will help you beat them. Dimir Rogues, Gruul aggro, I think is already favored, so you beat them. And Esper Yorion, you're playing Gruul aggro, so you beat them. And if you're main decking Soulseer, it's not that big of a deal. Like, I mean, if you have it against, some other opponents, it might be Soulseer might be worse against Soulseer might be worse against Dimir Rogues because it's expensive and you don't need to do 5 damage. You only need to do 3, so you'd want a Scorching Dragonfire. But I'm not saying do 4 Soulseers. You could do a mix if you're trying to account for Rogues and for Mono White Life Gain. But I would main deck some Soulseers for the Mono White Life Gain matchup, especially because it's the number 2 deck right now. So a lot of people are playing it. Moving on to best of 3. So the top 5 decks in the standard best of 3 format are Gruul aggro, of course. I think Gruul aggro has solidified its position as top dog in standard, especially in best of 3. So Gruul aggro, Dimir Rogues, Dimir Control, Mono Green Food, and Esper Yorion. Those are the top 5 decks in best of 3 standard right now. I'm going to throw an honorable mention out there. It didn't make the top 5, but it is a deck that is played a lot, is Temur Obosh. So it's it's like the Genesis Ultimate. It's Obosh ramp. It's Temur ramp. Obosh is just a free companion that just works with all the odd creatures in the deck. Can do a lot of damage. Casts Genesis Ultimatum. Gets an Ugin. Gets a Terror of the Peaks. You know the deal. Very powerful deck. It didn't make the top 5, but it is a deck that you will see on the ladder. So how do you combat the meta here? Play Gruul aggro. It's just the best deck in standard, clearly far and away in best of 3. Everybody's playing it. If you want consistency, you want wins, play Gruul aggro. It on the draw or on the play, I don't know that it has a really bad matchup. Other than that, I mean, yeah, that's the best I can do. Mono green food is good to combat Gruul. If you're going to be seeing a lot of Gruul, maybe play mono green to combat that, but if mono green is the 4th most played deck and Gruul aggro is the number 1 played deck, maybe playing more mono green might net you more wins if you're playing Gruul more, but I don't know. I don't think so. There's not a lot of advice I can give here because I feel like the best of 3 standard meta has settled totally and completely. So if you want to fight the meta, maybe play mono green. Play mono green because mono green does well, with post sideboard with Gargaroth and stuff. All these huge threats that Gruul aggro has a tough time removing and playing around until it gets its Embercleave. But you can account for Embercleave with Wilt and stuff like that. Maybe it post sideboard and all that. If you play mono green, maybe you'll face Gruul a lot and you'll get more wins. So maybe that's my advice. Either play Gruul aggro and get the consistency in the wins, or maybe try to fight the meta. And if you think you're going to be playing a lot of Gruul, try playing mono green as it goes bigger and can be really difficult for when on the crucial turns where Gruul needs to end the game. Mono green can go bigger. So it's one of those two things. Moving on to the historic format in best of 1, the number 1 deck is Goblins, number 2 deck is Blue-White Enchantments, number 3 is Gruul aggro, number 4 is Colorless Ramp, and number 5 is Mono-Red aggro. So best of 1 historic is not a format I'm entirely familiar with. It's not a format I really play. For those of you out there who play it, maybe you'll know better, but actually, the best advice I can give you here is play a deck that I've been playing recently, Primal Obliterator. It's a deck that I'll post a link in the description to I guess I can export my deck and show you guys kind of what I'm working with. But essentially, the real deck essentially is it's Phyrexian Obliterator mixed with Primal Might, but if you're playing a lot of these decks, like I eat goblins for lunch with Obliterator. Blue-White Enchantments, like if they don't have a flying enchantment and they attack into your Obliterator, they're sacrificing, however much damage, and they're getting their core spirit dancers up to like 9, 10, and they won't want to attack with it until they can get it to fly. And that's assuming they have the flying enchantment in their deck, which they probably do. So, Blue-White Enchantments is just a tough deck to get wins against in general. So maybe Phyrexian Obliterator isn't good there, but Phyrexian Obliterator would be good against Gruul aggro, Goblins, not colorless ramp, but mono red aggro. So that's 3 of the top 5 decks the Primal Obliterator deck would be. But essentially, Phyrexian Obliterator is good against aggro decks. If you're going to be coming up against it a lot, maybe might be a good thing to do. And the deck is just fun. You're using Primal Might to fight big creatures or whatever. You make your Phyrexian Obliterator huge, and then you make your opponent sacrifice that many creatures. So if you Primal Might your Obliterator up to a 9/9 and it fights one of their creatures and kills it, they have to then sacrifice 9 permanents, and you've basically won. I've had so many Goblins games end because they attack, they get the huge board that they always wanted, and then they attack into your Phyrexian Obliterator, and you probably have like maybe a couple Knight of the Ebon Legions that have been pumped up or something, or some other board presence. You can get successful block offs, and they're just attacking into an Obliterator, and you're making them sacrifice all the permanents that they just got. So in best of 1, I feel like the Primal Obliterator deck might be a good call. Again, historic best of 1, not really my thing, but that's the advice I can give. By the way, the Primal Obliterator deck is going to be an honorable mention at the end of the best of 3 thing. We'll talk about it. So in best of 3, I think the historic meta is kind of settling. The number 1 deck, to no one's surprise, is Sultai Midrange, the Nissa, Uro, Monstrosity, and then we have second deck is Gruul Aggro, third deck is Mono Red Goblins, fourth deck is Mono Red, and the fifth deck is Blue White Enchantment. So kind of the same deal here. I think like Primal Obliterator could work against a lot of these decks. Gruul Aggro, Mono Red Goblins, Mono Red, and Blue White Enchantments, it could be, I think it's kind of 50-50. I mean, if you can get your Obliterator out there, if you can get the right removal. Black obviously has a lot of cheap removal, so you can get rid of their core Spirit Dancers and stuff, and you can get rid of their Lurrus when they cast it, and even if they're able to get their core Spirit Dancer really big, if they aren't able to get a flying enchantment on it, they have to attack into an Obliterator, or you just hold them off long enough until you get your Primal Might, and then you make them sacrifice like a bunch of shit. So I feel like Primal Obliterator is pretty well positioned against a lot of those decks and can do really well. So my 2 honorable mentions for historic are Rakdos Arcanist. I think you're going to be seeing Rakdos Arcanist a lot. It's just a very popular deck, so prepare for it. And Primal Obliterator. I'm seeing that deck being posted a lot on Twitter, on Reddit. I would prepare for it. If you see Phyrexian Obliterators and stuff, if you start seeing Phyrexian Obliterators and stuff, and you see green mana, start getting ready for a Primal Might, because I think that this deck, I don't think it's going to explode. I don't think it's a meta breaker. I think it's just the meme deck of the week that you need to be prepared for. So you're going to see it a lot for maybe a week, just like Garuda. When Garuda came out and people figured out about that deck and that whole thing, people played it for a week. It was all over the place. I think you might see Obliterator maybe a little less popular, but you will see it every now and then. And I think you should, it's the meme deck of the week, so prepare for it. Rakdos Anarchist is not a meme deck of the week. Rakdos Anarchist is just a great deck. Make sure you have your Grafdigger's Cage in your sideboard. Grafdigger's Cage obviously will shut that down. If you're playing something that has to get stuff out of the graveyard as well, if you're playing Sultai Midrange, maybe have, Soul Guide Lantern ready for that. The rest of the decks, again, I think Primal Obliterator would be a fun deck to play. It's a fun deck to play, and I think it has a good matchup against a lot of those decks, so get ready for it. If you want to fight against if you want to fight against the Primal Obliterator deck, if you have the mana for it, Justice Strike will kill their own Obliterator and make them sacrifice a bunch of stuff. So maybe throw a couple Justice Strikes in your sideboard if you're playing in those colors. If you're playing white and red in any of your decks and you're trying to climb on the ladder, and you don't already have Justice Strike, maybe throw it in the sideboard and make your Primal Might Obliterator opponent sacrifice a shit ton of permanents and stuff. Kind of flip it on its head. And that about does it. So that's kind of those are the top decks right now, and that's kind of my advice for playing if you're trying to climb in the ladder. So just to reiterate everything, if you're playing best of 1 standard, play Gruul Aggro and main deck Soulseer. If you're playing best of 3 standard, just play Gruul Aggro, maybe Mono Green Food. If you're fighting a lot of aggro, Mono Green Food goes bigger, and Gruul Aggro has a tough time playing against it. Obviously, make sure you have your Wilts in your sideboard ready for their, whatever it is that they're playing. Some of those decks just play Embercleave. Some of those decks, I don't think they just play Great Henge, but some of those decks just play Embercleave. Some of those decks play Embercleave and Great Henge. You're going to want your Wilt for whatever they're able to resolve. And remember, you can also put a Soul Seer in your decks for best of 3 in the sideboard. Great against their Love Struck Beasts. You know, the last thing you need is their Love Struck Beast to resolve and stay resolved, and for them to resolve a Great Henge on the follow up. So Soul Seer in the sideboard, I don't think is a bad call. Yeah, there either. So play Gruul aggro or play mono green. If you're playing Gruul, have a Soul Seer in the sideboard and make sure you have that for their Love Struck Beast so they can't resolve Great Henge. And then in Historic, just try Primal Obliterator. Again, I'll have the link in the description to my deck. You can check it out. You can tune it for those of you best of 1 players out there in Historic. You can tune the deck for a best of 1 format. For you best of 3 players, just give it a try. I think like against these top decks, I think it does pretty well. Sultai midrange obviously is a little iffy. You know, they have Extinction Event. They're going to have a lot of cheap removal, so it's going to be pretty difficult against Sultai, and that's the most popular deck. But almost every other deck, you know, like 4 out of the top 5 decks, it's pretty good against. It might be memey, and it might be kind of like just weird. It's a meme deck of the week. But cash in on the meme deck of the week while you can and get those free wins against those other 4 decks. Sultai midrange is just... Uro is just a problem and needs to go. So if you're playing Historic, I guess, you know, if you want to hop on the Sultai bandwagon, go ahead. But if you want to try something new, something interesting, something that's kind of memey and fun and can actually get wins off of people who aren't expecting it, try this Primal Obliterator deck. It's pretty good. I think Mono Black Aggro is a good deck anyway, and I think it's fairly played in Historic. Maybe not as much as other decks, but you know, it has legs. And then I think this was just an interesting spin. I think the Splash Green for Primal Might with Obliterator was just an interesting spin. And I don't think people are preparing for Obliterator right now. So if you resolve if you resolve an Obliterator against these aggro decks and stuff like that, I think you're in a pretty good position. So here you go. That is the first Meta Monday on a Wednesday for for January 6th, 2021. Jesus Christ, I'm fucking drunk. Yeah, so let me know if you like these kind of videos, this kind of format, if you think my advice is stupid, if it's not. And yeah, that's it. So that does it for this first Meta Monday, and we'll catch you on the next Meta Monday. Obviously, there will be videos in between, but as far as Meta Mondays go, the next one should hopefully be next Monday. I'll try to keep it to Mondays, but I can't make any promises. So yeah, thanks everybody.